My son raised his glass and said, "To my father, the man who taught me what not to do." Laughter erupted, but I couldn't move. Every guest turned to me, people I hadn't seen in decades. Some I hurt, some I barely remembered. This wasn't a birthday party. It was revenge, dressed in streamers and cake. That was just the beginning. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. He used to call me Captain Dad. Said I was the strongest man in the world, part superhero, part anchor. I'd come home from double shifts, sore to the bone, and he'd be there on the couch, holding up his little arms like I could carry the whole world on my back. And I did. Or at least, I tried to. After Marjorie passed, James was all I had. He was barely 6. I still remember the way he asked me, just 2 days after the funeral, "Is Mommy still gonna help with my science fair?" I told him yes. And then I built the volcano myself after he went to sleep, my eyes blurry with tears, not from exhaustion, but from trying to match her kindness. I worked overtime for years, turning down promotions so I could pick him up from school, coach his little league, volunteer at the book fair even though I hated crowds. I packed his lunches with notes inside, wrote his initials on every glove, boot, and cap. I didn't date, didn't travel, didn't spend $1 that didn't first pass through a James filter. Every father says they'd do anything for their child. But I don't just say it, I lived it. I remember one game, he was maybe 10, hit his first home run. I was standing behind the dugout fence, and he looked right at me before he ran the bases. Not at his coach, not the crowd, me, his dad. When he came home that night, still glowing, he tossed his glove onto the couch and said, "That one was for you, Captain Dad." The smell of popcorn, the sound of cleats on gravel, the heat rising off the aluminum bleachers, those are stitched into my soul. But something shifted when he hit 15. He started closing his door more, talking less. Baseball gear stayed in the trunk instead of the porch. He didn't stop loving me, not then, but he started recategorizing me, from hero to background noise. I remember one year, my 54th birthday. It was a Monday, nothing big. I didn't expect a party, but I figured he'd say something, maybe a card, maybe just a "Happy birthday, Dad." He came home late, mumbling something about group projects. Went straight to his room. I waited, just sat there on the couch, the lights dimmed, holding on to the remote like it could keep me company. There was a small chocolate cake in the fridge, one I'd bought for myself 2 days earlier, just in case. Around 11:30, I pulled it out, cut a slice, and lit one of Marjorie's old candles. One of those thin pink ones we used to stick into cupcakes. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at it. Didn't sing, didn't make a wish, just watched it burn down in silence. The silence in the house was louder than any applause I'd ever heard at his games. Next morning, he came downstairs, half-dressed, backpack in one hand, banana in the other. I said casually, "You were tired last night." He looked confused. "Huh?" I nodded toward the counter. "It was my birthday." He blinked. "Oh, sorry, Dad, it's not a big deal. People forget birthdays all the time." I swallowed hard, pretending my coffee wasn't bitter. That was the first time he forgot. But it wasn't the last. After that, the space between us kept widening. He didn't call me Captain Dad anymore. Just Dad. Then hey. Then sometimes nothing. He stopped sitting with me during ball games. Said he liked watching alone so he could focus. He didn't hug me as much. When I'd reach for him, he'd pat my back instead, the way you'd pat an old dog who used to mean something to you. But I kept telling myself it was just the teenage fog. Everyone warned me about it, the distance, the one-word answers, the closed doors. I told myself it would pass. What I didn't know was that it wasn't just fog. It was the first step of him walking away. You don't lose a son overnight. It happens one unspoken moment at a time. The slide from Dad to him begins so quietly, you almost don't notice until you're no longer being spoken to, just around. After James moved out and got married, I told myself the silence was normal. He was building his own life, his own rhythms. And his wife Alana, well, she was spirited, as Marjorie might have said. The first time I met her, she shook my hand, without looking me in the eye. That should have told me everything, but I gave her grace. I always give people grace the first time. One Sunday, they invited me over for dinner. Just us three. I was hopeful, figured it meant they wanted connection. I brought a bottle of red and a casserole, Marjorie's old recipe. James used to love it as a kid. Dad's lasagna, he used to call it, even though it wasn't mine. When I arrived, they were both on their phones. No hug, no good to see you, just a distracted nod toward the table. During dinner, I made small talk, tried to bring up a home repair tip I'd read in a magazine. James cut me off mid-sentence with a smirk. That's old school thinking, Dad. His voice wasn't angry. It was amused, almost like I'd told a dumb joke in a meeting. Alana laughed. Not with me at me. I looked down, slicing into my overcooked garlic bread. Later that evening, we sat on the couch. Well, I sat, they sprawled. Alana glanced at my coat, draped over the armrest, and said with a giggle, "Did you dig that jacket out of storage?" James let out a breathy laugh, didn't even glance at me. I smiled tightly, but the wine tasted sour in my mouth, though I knew it wasn't the drink. I stayed 10 minutes longer, then made up a fake early morning appointment. They didn't walk me out. On the drive home, I told myself not to be sensitive. They were young. Maybe they didn't realize. Maybe I'd turned into background noise in his life. 2 weeks later, I ran into them again, this time at a mutual friend's engagement party. I was seated a few tables away, watching them from across the room. He used to look for me in every crowd. Now, he didn't even glance in my direction. I decided to swallow my pride and walk over. I stood behind him for a moment, waiting for him to notice. He didn't. I cleared my throat. "Hey, James." He turned, startled, then quickly masked it. "Oh, hey." I asked how things were going. He gave me a clipped, "Busy." Before I could say more, Alana appeared beside him, whispering something into his ear. They both chuckled. He didn't introduce me to the person standing beside them. As I walked away, I heard her say under her breath, "He still thinks he knows everything." And James replied, barely audible, "One day I'll teach the old man a lesson." I stopped walking, my breath caught in my throat. I stood there, frozen, among clinking glasses and soft jazz. My hand trembled at my side. I clenched my jaw so tightly, I felt something shift in my back molars. They didn't know I'd heard. I didn't confront them. I just walked back to my table, sat down, and tried to remember if I had imagined it. But I hadn't. It wasn't just teenage fog anymore. It was something else now. Something sharper. There's a difference between growing apart and planning distance. And my son, my sweet, bright-eyed, baseball hat-wearing boy, had just drawn a line I never thought he'd cross. At the dinner table, he mocked me silently. At the barbecue, he erased me completely. It started with a photo, one I wasn't in. My neighbor, Mrs. Carson, showed it to me on her phone. She was scrolling through Facebook, pointing out pictures from a weekend barbecue at James's house. There was a banner that read, "Family-only barbecue." There was James, Alana, Alana's sister, and her husband. Even my brother-in-law Tom, who hadn't spoken to me in years. Kids running through sprinklers, people clinking glasses. I wasn't invited. I wasn't even mentioned. Mrs. Carson, bless her heart, didn't realize what she'd done. She kept scrolling, cheerfully pointing out details. "Oh, look, that potato salad's the one you like, right?" I nodded. My throat was dry. "I didn't know you were there too," she added. I wasn't. That shut her up. Later that day, I stared at the photo again. Zoomed in on James, smiling, relaxed. He was standing right where I used to man the grill at family gatherings. He even had my old apron on the faded red one that said, "King of the Coals." It used to belong to Marjorie's father. I didn't call him, didn't ask why. Instead, I showed up. The next weekend, I drove over with a bottle of wine and a warm potato casserole. No invitation, no warning. I figured if they could exclude me without a word, I could attend without one. As I pulled into the driveway, a few heads turned. Conversations quieted. I stepped out of the car and tried to keep my expression neutral. A younger cousin, Melissa, saw me first. Her eyes widened, and then she said, almost too loudly, "Oh, we didn't think you were coming." I paused. That stung more than any direct insult. It meant they all knew I hadn't been invited. Before I could respond, Alana appeared. Her face didn't shift. She didn't flinch, didn't smile. She just looked me over slowly. Then she sniffed and said with a smirk, "Careful. Smells like this one came straight from the attic." Someone chuckled. I opened my mouth to speak, but the laughter swallowed my words before they could leave my tongue. James was standing a few feet away. He saw it happen. He heard it happen. And he did nothing. Worse, he turned to his wife, murmured something I couldn't hear, then took her by the elbow and led her inside. Not a hello, not a dad, just retreat. I stood there for a moment, holding the casserole like an offering to a ghost. The smell of grilled meat and charcoal clung to my clothes as I walked back to the car. I didn't say goodbye. No one stopped me. At home, I sat on the couch and replayed the moment again and again. Her tone, his silence, the way he walked away like I wasn't even a guest, just clutter on the porch. Later that night, I dug through my old drawer and found a birthday card. One Marjorie had written to me the year James turned 10. Inside, in her loopy handwriting, she'd written, "Don't let your failures turn into his future. He needs your strength, not your regrets." I pressed the card to my chest and closed my eyes. For a moment, I could still smell her perfume. Lilacs and lavender. Warmth and warning. The next morning, the phone rang. James. "Hey," he said, casually, like nothing had happened. "We're planning something special for your birthday. Big party. You don't need to worry about a thing." I didn't respond. "We've got the guest list covered," he added. "Just sit back and enjoy the spotlight, okay?" My fingers slipped, and the phone almost fell from my hand. I caught it barely, and suddenly, I wasn't sure if I'd just been offered a celebration or a setup. The guest list read more like a courtroom than a celebration. A week after that phone call, James stopped by with a printed list in hand. "Here," he said, dropping it on the kitchen table. "Just so you don't feel left out. We thought you should know who's coming." His voice was light, but the way he said "we" made my skin crawl. I picked up the list. Right away, something felt off. There were names that didn't belong, people I hadn't spoken to in years. People who didn't celebrate me, they tolerated me. Some had cut ties altogether. Tom, my estranged brother. We hadn't spoken since the inheritance fight after Marjorie's father passed. Linda, my ex from before Marjorie, who once tried to claim James was hers. Martin, my former boss, the one who fired me just months after Marjorie's diagnosis. And beneath their names, scribbled notes in James's handwriting. "Let Tom speak. Dad won't like this. Print Mom's letters, pass them around. Invite Pastor Dale. He remembers the fight." Each note was like a small cut, not because they were planning speeches, but because they were crafting a narrative, a public trial, masquerading as a party. I looked up from the list. James was sipping coffee, casually scrolling his phone. "You said this was a celebration," I murmured. He shrugged. "It island. But people deserve the whole picture. The real picture." There was a long silence. "You planned this behind my back," I said. He didn't deny it. "You planned a lot of things behind mine. Guess it runs in the family." I didn't know what he was talking about. Or maybe I did. Old ghosts, old wounds. But I didn't understand why now. Why like this? After he left, I sat at the kitchen table for what felt like hours. List still in hand. The sun dipped, shadows crept in, and I didn't bother turning on the light. At some point, I reached into the drawer beside me, the one I hadn't opened in years, and pulled out a birthday card from Marjorie. It was one of the last she ever gave me. Inside, her handwriting trembled just slightly the way it did during chemo. It read, "Don't let your mistakes shape the man he becomes. Show him who you are, not who you were." I'd failed that. Somewhere along the way, I let the cracks widen, let silence settle in like rot. My breath shortened. My ears rang like church bells. The kitchen felt smaller, tighter, like the walls were pressing in. This wasn't a birthday party. It was a verdict, and the punishment was waiting for me. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. When I asked him why, he said, "You've got a lot to answer for." That was all. No context, no conversation. Just that. We were sitting on my porch a few days before the party. James had come by, said he wanted to check in, but really, he just wanted to make sure I hadn't bailed. I looked at him across the weathered table, the wood stained from years of coffee mugs and Marjorie's garden tools. "Answer for what?" I finally asked. He stared at me like I was a puzzle he no longer had the patience to solve. "For everything you think you hid. For how you raised me. For Mom." His words settled between us like ash. I wanted to tell him the truth, that I didn't hide anything, that I loved him more than breath, that I sat beside his mother for every chemo appointment, every sleepless night, every time she cried and begged me to promise she'd see him graduate. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded once, slow and tired. "You think you know everything." James stood, brushed invisible lint off his sleeves. "It's time people saw the real you." Then he walked to his car without another word. The next morning, I got a knock on the door. Mr. Alvarez from next door, a retired mechanic and, lately, a quiet kind of friend. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyes flicking toward the house. I nodded. "Just a birthday party." He raised an eyebrow. "Some party. Lot of cars here yesterday. Your son was shouting on the phone outside. Didn't look like cake and candles." I forced a smile. "Families, right?" He didn't push, just patted my shoulder and handed me a box of tomatoes from his garden. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marjorie's words in that birthday card. I sat at my desk, opened the same drawer, and that's when I saw it, an envelope I hadn't noticed before. It was thick, sealed, and labeled in my son's handwriting. "Dad, open after the party." Just the sight of it made my heart thud harder. I picked it up, turned it over, held it to the light like it could reveal its contents. I almost tore it open. My thumb pressed against the flap. My breath hitched. But something stopped me. Not fear, not curiosity, something deeper. I set the envelope down, and then I put it in the drawer. The drawer shut, but I kept hearing it in my head, over and over. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. 2 days after I found that envelope, I drove to see Henry, my old friend and lawyer. We hadn't talked in years, not really, but he greeted me like no time had passed. "Still keeping the same damn coat," he said with a chuckle, patting my back. "I keep things that matter," I replied. We sat in his office, the kind with shelves that smell like old paper and honesty. He offered me coffee. I declined. "I want to change the will," I said. He blinked. "All of it?" "All of it." He leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. "This about James?" I didn't answer directly. Instead, I pulled out a folded photo, me, James, and Marjorie from years ago, standing in front of the old oak tree she planted in our backyard. James was holding a plastic baseball bat, grinning. Marjorie had her arm around both of us. "She loved that tree," I said softly. "Said roots matter more than branches." Henry looked at the picture for a long moment. "You sure about this?" I nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's write." We started from scratch. The house not to James. The savings not to James. The land not to be sold. Ever. Instead, it would become something Marjorie would have been proud of. A non-profit space for fathers and children. A weekend retreat. Something that might save someone else's story before it fractured like ours. Then I added one more clause. If this will is contested, all assets will go directly to charity. No loopholes, no battles. Henry looked at me carefully. You know this might make things worse before it gets better. I'm not doing it to win, I said. I'm doing it because it's the only truth I have left. He nodded. Then he pushed a blank sheet of paper toward me and said, Do you want to include a letter? I paused. Then I picked up the pen. I didn't write much, just a few lines. You taught me how to hold on. I just wish I'd taught you when to let go. On the way out, Henry walked me to the door. I hope this gives you peace, he said. Peace only comes after honesty, I replied. He smiled, and then I added, remembering Marjorie's voice in the garden, honesty is the only soil where roses grow. That night, I walked home through the backyard. The oak tree was still there, stronger than ever, its roots deeper than anything James could see from the surface. The wind blew through the leaves, and for a second, I could have sworn I heard her whispering, just beneath the rustle. I opened the envelope a day early. I wish I hadn't. It sat in the drawer for a week, humming like a quiet threat. Every night I thought about it. Every morning I pretended it didn't exist. But the day before the party, I cracked. The house was too quiet. My coffee tasted like cardboard. I sat at the desk, opened the drawer, and stared at the thick white envelope like it might bite. Then I tore it open. Inside was a packet. Pages printed out, emails, notes, lists. Some handwritten, some typed. All curated by James. The first page read, Talking Points, Dad's birthday. I skimmed through with a strange detachment, like I was reading about a stranger. James had written a speech, not a toast, a eulogy, for a man who was still alive. There were lines like, Let's not forget who disappeared when things got hard. He ran from grief. We paid the price. Then came the part that made my stomach twist. You weren't there when Mom cried at night. You chose work over her health. I dropped the paper. The room spun for a second. My ears rang. I clenched the arms of my chair so hard the wood creaked. And then, worse than any accusation, came the lies wrapped in half-truths. About my job. About my silence. About how I moved on too fast. After Marjorie's death, when I hadn't moved at all. I felt like a ghost being dragged back into a world I no longer recognized. But it wasn't just his words that gutted me. It was the intent. He didn't want a party. He wanted a reckoning. He wanted to wound me in front of others, with a smile on his face and applause from the audience. I stumbled into the living room and sat down, staring at the same carpet Marjorie once vacuumed every Saturday morning. My chest ached, but not in the way fear feels. This was grief, curling into something harder, something steel-edged. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness, I saw her, Marjorie, in that hospital room, hooked to machines, pale but beautiful. I remembered a night she couldn't sleep from the pain, and I sat beside her reading aloud from a gardening book, just to distract her. She reached for my hand and said, You don't have to talk, just be here. And I was, every single time. So where had that version of me gone in James's story? Buried, edited, rewritten. I stood up and walked to the hallway closet, pulled out a storage box marked Keep. Inside were photographs, letters, even one of Marjorie's old voicemails saved on a tiny recorder. I placed them on the dining table one by one. Then I grabbed the revised will, the guest list, the speech notes. Finally, I pulled a folder labeled Just in Case. Inside was a thumb drive with photos, bank statements, and something James had forgotten existed, a letter Marjorie had written to him years ago but never sent. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. That night, I packed everything into a leather briefcase and set it by the door. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just sat there, watching the light move across the floorboards, hour by hour. And I whispered something I hadn't said in a long time. Let's give them something real to remember. They had balloons. Can you believe that? I walked into my own betrayal, with streamers hanging from the porch and a banner that read, Happy 70th, Dad, we love you. The house was full. Neighbors, extended family, co-workers I hadn't seen in years. All smiling, sipping punch, clapping me on the back like I was the man of the hour. I nodded, smiled, shook hands, played the role. James greeted me at the door with his arms wide. There he is, the man himself. I flinched slightly when he hugged me. He didn't notice. Alana handed me a slice of cake on a paper plate. Chocolate, of course. Marjorie's favorite. Enjoy it, she said, smiling too wide. The speech starts soon. I knew what was coming. I waited. It was around sunset when James tapped the glass with a spoon and stood on the patio stairs. Everyone gathered. Some held drinks. Others pulled out their phones. He cleared his throat. I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate my father, a man of great complexity. There was polite laughter. Then he began. He talked about childhood, about loss, about grief, and then slowly he veered. Not everyone knows the full story. Not everyone saw what happened behind closed doors. But tonight, I think it's time we share that. I didn't interrupt. I let him speak. He read lines I'd already seen. About my emotional distance. About how I left the room when it mattered most. Some faces in the crowd shifted. Eyes darted. I looked at them and saw confusion, curiosity, some sympathy, but not judgment. Not yet. And then he said it. You weren't there when Mom cried at night. You chose work over her health. And I've carried that weight my whole life. He looked down, as if he was the wounded one. I stepped forward. The crowd quieted. May I said. He hesitated, then stepped back, gesturing like a man offering a stage he thought he controlled. I walked up the stairs, briefcase in hand. My voice was steady. I wasn't planning to say anything, but since this is a night for truth, let's have some. I opened the case and held up the envelope, the one he labeled open after the party. I read it, I said. Every word, every note, every plan. Murmurs rippled through the guests. Then I held up a photo, me, Marjorie, and James in front of the oak tree. This is the man I was, and this is the boy I raised. And this, I pulled out a letter, is the woman you claimed I abandoned writing to you, telling you not to forget how much I sacrificed. I handed it to him. His hand shook. I stayed, I said. Through every treatment, every scream, every night she thought she'd die before morning. I stayed. He didn't meet my eyes. I gave up everything for you, I added. And you turned my love into leverage. I paused, breathing slowly. So if you came here tonight for blood, I'll give you truth instead. I pulled out the revised will. This house, this land, the savings, they're no longer yours. You wanted a trial? You wanted a sentence? I looked him in the eye. Here's the verdict. I turned to the crowd. This home will become a place for fathers and sons who lost each other like we did. A place where honesty matters more than appearances. Silence. Total, sharp silence. Then one aunt clapped, quietly. Then another. I stepped down. James didn't follow me. Neither did Alana. I walked out through the same door I entered, past the same fake banner. Only this time, I was lighter. Do you think the father made the right choice? Comment, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The morning after the party, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Not just silent, hollow. I sat at the same kitchen table where James once drew crayon dragons, and Marjorie braided her hair in the sunlight. Now it was just me, a cold cup of coffee, and an ache in my chest I couldn't name. I expected anger. I expected a flood of calls, texts, some kind of fallout, but there was nothing, just silence. At the bakery, I overheard two women whispering near the register. They say he humiliated his own son. At his birthday party, no less. Later, at the post office, a clerk leaned in and said, "Heard what you did. Brave move, sir. Not many men could have stood that tall." The town didn't pick sides. It just watched. And James? He didn't call, didn't text, not even a knock on the door. I kept thinking about that moment, the look in his eyes, when I handed him Marjorie's letter. He didn't read it in front of anyone. He tucked it in his pocket like something dangerous. Part of me hoped it pierced something. But mostly, I stopped hoping. Instead, I started walking. Every morning, I'd take the path behind our house, past the dried-up creek bed, through the small woods where Marjorie once planted wildflowers. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. One morning, I found her old kneeling cushion still tucked behind the lilac bushes. Faded, worn through the middle, I sat down next to it and just listened. Wind in the trees, birds arguing over seeds, the distant hum of someone mowing a lawn. No applause, no shame, just life, indifferent and ongoing. I thought a lot about roots, how Marjorie used to say, trees don't hold grudges, they just keep growing. Maybe I could too. A few days later, Mr. Alvarez waved me over to the fence. He handed me a brown bag filled with late-season tomatoes and said, "You looked lighter walking yesterday." I smiled. "I guess I am." Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You ever think about doing something with that big old house?" I raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" He shrugged. "You've got space, stories, maybe something more useful than silence." It stuck with me. That night, I sat on the porch and pulled out an old photo album, the real kind, with sticky pages and faded corners. There were photos of James as a boy, Marjorie in her gardening gloves, me grilling with socks pulled too high. I laughed once, just once. Then I flipped to a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was the backyard early spring, when Marjorie first planted the roses. The soil was still raw, her hands muddy, her smile wide. On the back, she'd written in pencil, "Let beauty come from broken things." I touched the page like it might pulse. Maybe Mr. Alvarez was right. Maybe silence could become something that mattered. It started with one phone call to Emily. Emily was my niece's daughter, a quiet girl, maybe 23, who used to visit in summers when her parents fought too loudly. Back then, she'd sit in the yard with Marjorie, watching bees dance between hydrangeas. She was the only one from the younger generation, as I called them, who had sent a birthday card. No speech, no performance, just a short message in blue ink. "You were kind to me when I needed it. Happy birthday." So I called. "Hey, it's your uncle." "Well, I guess great uncle," I said awkwardly. She laughed. "Hi, I was hoping you'd call." That surprised me. "I was thinking," I said slowly, "about turning the house into something different. Something useful." There was a pause. Then she said, "Like a retreat?" I blinked. "Exactly. I've been volunteering at a shelter downtown," she added. "A lot of kids and single dads. They don't have anywhere to go on weekends." That night, we talked for an hour. By the end of the week, I had a name. Marjorie's home. Not a shelter. Not quite a retreat. Something in between. A place for fathers and their kids, especially those trying to rebuild something broken. Not just blood ties. Chosen ones too. I emptied out the guest room first. Cleared shelves. Donated boxes of clothes I hadn't touched since Marjorie passed. Found old books, some hers, some James's, and dusted them off. The house smelled different with the windows open. Lighter. Emily came the following weekend with her friend Daniel, a quiet man who'd been through foster care and knew how to fix just about anything. We worked in silence for a while. Then, as we painted the back hallway, she said, "You know, this place doesn't feel sad anymore." I didn't respond. But I felt it too. People started coming. First, a single father named Paul and his son, Tyler, a quiet boy who barely spoke. Then 2 teenage brothers whose uncle was raising them after a messy court case. They didn't ask questions about me. They just helped. Painted, repaired, cooked, laughed. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and saw a post-it note on the fridge. It said, "Thanks for the space. Feels like we can breathe here. Signed only, T." I stuck it inside my journal. That night, Emily and I sat on the porch. She sipped tea. I nursed my knees. "You know what the kids started calling the place?" she asked. "What?" "Grandma's home." My throat tightened. I stared out at the yard, where Marjorie's roses had bloomed wild again for the first time in years. "She would have liked that," I said, barely above a whisper. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't since the moment James first looked through me like I was furniture. I felt still. Not hollow, not boiling. Just still. By October, the house felt alive again. Not crowded, just full. Full of footstep echoes, mismatched mugs in the sink, music drifting from rooms where no one cried anymore. Most mornings, I'd wake up before sunrise, make a pot of strong black coffee, and sit on the porch. Not out of loneliness anymore, but habit, ritual. Sometimes Daniel would join me, sometimes Paul, sometimes just silence, which I had grown to trust again. People came and went. No one overstayed. But no one left broken. Emily called it soft healing. I liked that. One Saturday, a knock came at the back door. It was Tyler, the quiet boy, who used to flinch at every loud sound. He was holding a drawing. It was a sketch of the house, with a big sign over it that said, "Grandma's home." "I added flowers," he said, "like in the yard." I nodded. She would have liked that. He smiled, a real one this time, and ran off toward the workshop, where Daniel was teaching him how to sand wood. That afternoon I sat down and made a list of repairs left to do. Gutters, siding, the porch swing chain needed replacing. As I worked, I heard tires crunching on the gravel driveway. I looked up. James's car. He didn't get out. Just sat there, window half down, engine running, watching. I stood still, pen in hand. After a minute, he pulled away. No wave, no signal, but he came back the next day. Same thing. And the day after that. Sometimes Alana was with him, sometimes not. They never walked up to the house, never knocked, just watched. By the fifth time, I stopped pretending not to notice. I simply went back to fixing the porch swing. Emily saw them once and asked, "Do you want me to say something?" "No," I said. "Let them figure out why they're here." Because I already had. They weren't coming back for me. They were coming back for what they'd thrown away and finally realized they couldn't recreate. Real family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when you're too tired to ask for help. It's the kid who sketches your house with flowers. It's the neighbor who brings you tomatoes when your heart is splitting. It's the niece who remembers how your wife smelled like lavender and saw the man beneath the silence. That night, I sat under the oak tree, the one Marjorie planted with a shovel and a prayer, and whispered, "It's safe now." The wind stirred the branches. A few leaves fell, soft and golden. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of fresh earth and roses. And I knew, without doubt, I had found my family. It was just before winter, when James finally knocked. The sky was gray, the porch cold. I was trimming back the rose bushes, Marjorie's roses, when I heard it. 3 knocks. Not urgent, not angry, just uncertain. I opened the door. James stood there, in a black coat, hands deep in his pockets. His eyes were tired, his jaw clenched like it was holding back too many words. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He didn't sit, just paced, looked at the floor, then up at the walls. He stared for a long time at a photo of Marjorie and me, from the early years, framed, dusty, a little crooked. "I didn't read her letter right away," he said finally. "The one you gave me at the party. I didn't say anything." He kept pacing. "When I did, I cried. Not just because of what she wrote, but because I realized how much I'd rewritten our history to fit how I felt." He paused near the window, looked out toward the garden. "I hated you because I thought you left us. I needed a villain, someone to blame, and you were easy." His voice cracked. Maybe I didn't see the whole truth. I sat down at the table and motioned for him to do the same. He didn't. He just stood there, hands shaking slightly. "I was hurting," And I wanted to hurt you, he said. It was childish, cruel, but it felt justified back then. There was a long pause. Then he finally looked me in the eye. I'm sorry, Dad. I heard the words. They were real, but something inside me didn't move. Not out of pride, or revenge, or bitterness, but because I'd already built something out of the wreckage, and I wasn't sure there was room left for him in it. I nodded. That's all I could manage. He sat. Finally. I see what you're doing here, he said, glancing around at the open floor. The new bookshelves, the stack of drawings from kids who'd come and gone. It's good. It's what Mom would have wanted. She would have. I agreed softly. There was silence again. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Is it too late? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I thought about Marjorie. About the woman who always forgave faster than she should have. Who believed people could change, but only if they earned it. Maybe, I said. Maybe not. He nodded like he expected that. I'm not here to ask for the will back, he added quickly. I know that's gone, and I know I don't deserve anything from you. I just wanted to say it out loud. What I did, what I ruined. We sat in silence for a long time. Then, Emily appeared in the doorway with a mug of tea. She didn't ask questions, just placed it gently in front of me and nodded politely to James. He nodded back, awkward. She looked at me, a quiet question in her eyes. I gave her the smallest nod. She left. James watched her go. She calls this place Grandma's home, he said. She named it herself. He gave a weak smile. That's nice. I took a long breath. Let the silence settle again. Then I said, if you want to be part of this, it won't be through blood or guilt. It'll be through showing up. He nodded. And for once, he didn't argue. He just sat there, quiet, small, real. Have you ever had to rebuild trust after betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional, true-life stories. Spring came late that year. The roses were the first to return. Bright red, full bloom, stronger than I remembered. Emily said they bloomed early because the soil had healed. I liked that. By April, Marjorie's home was no longer just an idea. It was moving. There was a rhythm to it, morning coffee pots, laughter in the hallways, wet socks left by the porch after kids played in the sprinkler. We had 4 families staying in rotation. 1 grandfather and grandson. A teenage father learning how to braid hair. A mother in recovery who helped with the garden in exchange for quiet nights. They weren't perfect people, but they were real, and they showed up. One Sunday afternoon, we had a cookout in the backyard, just like the ones Marjorie used to host. Daniel grilled. Emily hung string lights from the old oak tree. Someone brought lemonade. Someone else played an old guitar. I sat in the corner, plate on my lap, and watched it all unfold. It wasn't a party for me. It was something bigger. At one point, Tyler, the quiet boy, who once hid behind doors, ran up to me with a smile that nearly knocked me over. "Hey!" he shouted, holding up a small wooden sign he'd painted. It read, "Marjorie's house, a place to start over." I swallowed hard, blinked back something sharp. Then I heard it. A familiar voice, hesitant, unsure. "Hey, Dad." James. He stood by the back gate, wearing a clean shirt, holding a tray of deviled eggs that looked too neat to be homemade. "Emily invited me," he said, almost apologetic. "I know," I replied. He stepped in slowly, like the grass might reject him. No one stared. No one whispered. Emily waved him toward the table. James sat next to Daniel, helped Tyler hang the sign on the porch post. He didn't try to lead. He didn't make speeches. He just helped. And when the sun dipped low, and people started heading home, he stayed behind. We sat on the porch again, just the 2 of us, like we hadn't in decades. He didn't say much, but before he left, he looked at the roses and said, "She'd be proud of you." I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "She'd be proud of this. Of all of them." He nodded. Then, Just before stepping off the porch, he turned and asked, "Will you let me come back?" "Only if you keep showing up," I said. He gave a quiet smile. "I will." That night, I walked out to the garden. Marjorie's roses glowed under the string lights, soft, defiant, alive. And I thought about everything they tried to do to me. The shame, the erasure, the rewritten story. They tried to bury me in silence. They tried to bury me in shame, but I turned it into roots. That was the best revenge of all.